we have to build self-reliant, confident, resilient, young, cool adults who can go out into the world and be self-sufficient.
On the ExpertsConnect podcast, we have thought-provoking conversations with top-performing experts on topics that matter to you. With ExpertsConnect, you'll uncover fascinating facts and gain the necessary skills you'll need to improve all aspects of your life. Hi, and welcome to ExpertsConnect. Today we have Kelly Biltz, ADHD life coach for teens at Loving GrADDitude. I love that name, GrADDitude. Hi, Kelly. How are you doing?
Hi, Katie Ann. I am well. I am so well. And that Loving GrADDitude, there's an ADD in the middle of it. I think that's what we need to tell the viewers. There's the ADD in the middle of it.
Ah, okay. That's so cute.
Because I love ADD, and I had to incorporate that in my name somehow.
Okay, great. And Kelly, can you please tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a mom of two teenagers who are 16 and 14, and our youngest, two boys. And our youngest was diagnosed when he was in the third grade. And after that, I spent 2 years. I didn't know at the time that there was such a thing as an ADHD life coach, or I would have hopped on that bandwagon and really helped myself. But it was a blessing in disguise. And I spent 2 years researching, studying, really changing my lifestyle, changing my parenting techniques, my language, my approach, and everything with my child, and started advocating for him in the school systems. And I saw a lot of changes with his behavior and his reactions. And I think it was 2.5 years afterwards, I was scrolling through my Twitter feed and I saw a training for ADHD life coach. I was like, are you kidding me? Where has this been? And so fast forward, I went through 1.5 years worth of training and started my work. I opened my practice, opened my business. And when I first started, I worked with everyone because I just wanted to get coaching under my belt. I work with adults who were diagnosed. I work with parents, and I work with younger kids and what have you. And now teenagers are my passion. I have teenagers. I've parented over 15 years of adolescents and teenagers because I have stepchildren who are now adults. And I just love the adolescent and teen years. So yeah, so that's in the nutshell of who I am and what I'm doing right now. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. And can you tell us what exactly is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD?
Yeah, so good question. Thankfully, it's a lot more popular than what it was 25 years ago. ADHD is basically a developmental impairment of the brain's self-management system. And what I mean by that is we have 41% of our brain is what's called our executive functions. And it's how we plan our days, how we execute our tasks, how we focus, how we organize our thoughts. And it's basically that part of our brain that is impacting the ability to focus, execute, and plan out how we decide to live our days. In some ways, it should be, I feel it should be an executive function disorder, if I may, because it's caused by low amounts of neurotransmitters, which are the brain chemicals that are, correspond in our brain. And majority of the neurotransmitters that are low producing really fuel that frontal lobe, which is where our executive functions reside, if I may.
Yes. And can you clarify what you mean by executive functions for our audience?
Yeah. So executive functions, again, so it's when you think about executive functions, I also refer to the frontal lobe of our brain, which is literally the frontal lobe. And that encompasses 41% of our brain. Okay. It's a majority of the largest part of our brain. And in the executive function part of our brain, it's responsible for time management, organization, our working memory, like how we retain, recall, apply what we've just learned, planning, prioritizing, our emotional response, the ability to focus. When you think about all of those things, it's really how we respond and plan out our days. And I mean, we can talk a lot. We'll get into how it affects teenagers and the academic element of it. But yes, that is that part of the brain that really decides how we prioritize something, how we decide on tasks, how we get motivated to do things, implement, initiate our impulsivity, like the list goes on and on.
Thanks for clarifying. This is getting really interesting. So can you tell me, what are the signs and symptoms of ADHD?
So I briefly talked about a couple of them. So I think that probably the main one that everyone, recognizes is the lack of focus or challenges with focusing, right? And also impulsivity. When you think about focus, again, the executive function, that neurotransmitter that helps with the focus and the attention, the brain has a deficit of those neurotransmitters. So a lack of focus, impulsivity, poor time management, emotional regulation, difficulty in prioritizing tasks, limited attention span, procrastination with my teenagers, right? A lot of procrastination on subjects, a lot of anxiety is very present, difficulty with getting motivated, forgetfulness. Yeah, I'm trying to think about other things with my teenager as well, but that pretty much encompasses what I live with on a day, and my husband for that matter, what I live with on a daily basis. So.
Yeah. So you're mentioning the lack of focus, impulsivity, all these things, but how can it be treated?
So there's a lot of ways, and it's not a one size, one pill, one approach fits all. It's a multi-dimensional approach. Yeah. And I liken it to a piece of pie, right? How many slices in a pie? Like 8 slices in a pie or something like that. It's all encompassing. So obviously there's meds. Obviously you have diet. Diet is really important, right? What we put in really affects. There's the gut brain heart health that is all connected. You have exercise that is really important. You have a support system. A lot of the teenagers who I work with, they have me as a coach. They have tutors. They have psychologists. They have counselors. Like, it takes a lot of support, a big village. Even the parents have a village, if I may, to help them support their child. The structure and routine in the house, figuring out your child's best practices, their tools. So, and of course, supplements as well. Like, it is not just one size fits all. It is a multi-dimensional approach to treating ADHD. And it's a long, some of it has to be tweaked. It's not okay. We have all these things in place now and go, right? It's a lifestyle. It's a continual implementation, of these practices.
Beautiful. And we'll go more into the holistic approach later. But you mentioned that you are an ADHD life coach for teens. Mm-hmm. So what does ADHD look like in a teenager?
So here's how I liken it. So in the elementary years, really up to the 5th grade, parents were their frontal lobe, meaning we think for them, we plan for them, we keep them safe, we give them the foundations, if I may. We plan their day. Here's what you do when you come home. Here's your homework, right? We're going to sit down and work with you. We really structure your day. Starting in the middle school and high school years, as they come into 10, 11, 12-year-old, 13 and above, right? Double digits, if I call it double digits. They start, first of all, their brain starts coming into a different stage and their brain starts growing. But when they start getting into this next developmental stage, there's a lot of different moving parts, right? So they're not handheld in the school anymore. They have to start navigating different teachers, different schedules, different styles of learning. They have to learn how to take notes. They have to learn how to study. And they're also going through adolescence, right? So you have the hormones, you have the body changes, you have the moods, they're also socially learning their place in their social circles, which is a huge, 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 huge part of adolescence and just the teenage years. So when you think about time management and planning, and you're shifting that responsibility to them, it taps into that executive function part of your brain, where all of a sudden they are 5 assignments behind and they're shutting down because they're struggling with how to prioritize, how to manage their time, and they're overwhelmed and they're full of anxiety. So it really, really, really taps into that frontal lobe, because parents are slowly letting go, and it's now the teenager's responsibility to manage that and figure that out on their own, which is the challenge.
Yeah, most definitely. So would you say that ADHD is intensified in puberty?
I think it does, because because as parents, like, we have to start letting them figure out and navigating. They have to figure out their system. They have to figure out how to manage their time. When is their time to best focus? How to own their time, how to be most productive. They have to tap into that, because we are not going to be able to go to college for them. We're not going to be able to think for them. Like, we have to build self-reliant, confident, resilient, young, cool adults who can go out into the world and be self-sufficient. And if we continue to handhold, we're doing them a huge disservice. So it's allowing them sort of to fail forward. I liken it that in the middle school years, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade here in the United States, like, it's a great time for letting your child learn and fail, because colleges are not looking at any grades, right? In 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, everything matters in high school. So it's a great time to let them, okay, that didn't work, but I haven't turned in 10 assignments, but I got an 85 on a test. So, okay, fine. So I can, so it is very challenging. And I think it is probably the most difficult time, because as a parent, to watch that happen, but it's a fine line. Like, you have to just be their co-pilot and give them options and help them navigate it and help them figure out their best systems, instead of saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. Because what I've learned is that as a parent, like, my system does not work for my sons. Like, I have a completely different process, completely different learning style. Mine stuff doesn't work. So they have to figure that out on their own.
Yeah. And you have sons, but how does it look for girls? Is it different for girls that are teenage girls that are suffering from ADHD?
I think the overarching problems and challenges are the same. I think it manifests itself differently in symptoms, looking as nonstop talking. I don't think girls are as defiant, if I may. They tend to daydream a little bit more. They might be a little bit more withdrawn. They're maybe a lot more maybe a little bit more emotional, if I may. Guys I'm talking about boys, and my boys they don't show a lot of emotion. They own it. Like, there's very little emotion going on in my home. And I just think that that's a difference between boys and girls. And I might get pushback from that, but in my house, there's very little emotion. But so but the overarching, like, staying on task and feeling shut down because of the procrastination and feeling overwhelmed and having that anxiety, like those bigger time management planning, those are there, but it manifests itself in what I just shared, like the nonstop talking, and maybe even the reverse of that, and becoming withdrawn and much more emotional, if I may.
Yeah. And I can imagine that as a parent, you're in the teenage years, you want to give your child some space to develop on their own. So how do teenagers with ADHD manage with these challenges? What are their coping mechanisms?
That's a great question. And some of it they have to figure out on their own. And it's going to be hard to say, but some of them don't want help from their parents, and they get really behind in their school. And until they're in a really poor spot, then they like supercharge and tap into their hyper focus, and then they get their work turned in. Some recognize that they need the help after a while, right? Some will defer to their parents after a while. But it's by default. Like at some point, they are going to have to own their own work, and they're going to have to realize that the big picture is they're going to either fail their classes, they might have to take a summer school, or they might have to repeat a grade. The hardest thing I think in the teenage years and high school years is that until it actually resonates, until the teenager is truly affected by it, there's very little movement. So you have to figure out their motivation, right? Because they can go down a rabbit hole and truly not care. So finding that motivation and helping them come out of it is very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And it has to be intrinsic, like it has to come from them, because parents can, like literally as a coach, I can lead you, I can help you find your tools, I can help pour into all the accolades to you. But if you're not going to get off of our call and put it into practice, like it has to come from within. They have to be self-motivated to want to help themselves. And some of that, unfortunately, won't come until they're truly on their own and nobody is available. I shouldn't say nobody, but until it really, really makes a difference in their world.
Yeah. And this is really interesting. At what time do the parents contact you as the life coach to help them through these challenges?
When the teenagers aren't listening anymore to the parents, when the relationship is in crisis mode, when their teen is failing 3 and 4 classes, when they're in a full state, they're pretty much in crisis mode. And when they're in sophomore, juniors, and needing those life skills to help. And a lot of listen, I pretty much sometimes say the same thing as a parent, but coming from a third unbiased person, it works.
Yeah.
And the parents know that. And I really respect the parents and the teens for getting to that place, right? The best thing you can do for your child and for your teenager is to find the right support, whether it's me, whether it's a counselor, whether it's a tutor. Like it has to be all hands on deck if your teen is struggling and they are behind in their work and they have very low self-esteem and they're just in this negative downward spiral. Like it has to be all hands on deck to save them.
Yes, I agree. And I would say that let me ask. I would believe that you don't use a one size fits all approach in helping these teenagers, right? So how exactly are you helping them? What's your general principle?
The coaching process is very based on the client. So there will be some clients that, some teens that are failing 3 grades, right? Mm-hmm. And so they need me to literally break down their week at a glance, right? And we break down their assignments. I've worked with teenagers and figured out how they keep track, like their tools. They want to write everything in a Google slide, and then they have their Post-it note for their day, right? Some are planners, some need timers. Like I help find their best practice, right? Their best form of environment, their best focus time, their best tools that they need, right? I help them understand how ADHD is getting in their way as far as keeping them in this overwhelmed state, right? I help them understand how to get motivated, and starting and just taking the first step and breaking things down and chunking their time. I help them time manage their lives. And one of the things that I'm really, really pouring into them right now is like, one of the best life skills that you can possibly have is learning how to manage your time. And that can be a huge meltdown, shutdown, like, no, 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 because time and ADHD is such a big challenge. And I'm like, I don't know one CEO, one video game producer, one NBA dude, or one like gymnast who doesn't have multiple people, multiple tools that are keeping them productive, that are keeping them on task, on their meetings, getting all their work done, because you need multiple tools. And when you help them switch that mindset, right? And help them get out of their own way. And I tell them, I'm like, you are getting in your own way right now by being stubborn. I say it lovingly, of course, right? But because they trust me, because I've worked with them for so long, I can say that to them. I've earned their trust that I can speak the truth, tough love, if I may. Yeah. Like, you're getting in your own way by being really difficult in your thinking. But when you realize that you can limit your distractions, when you have that self-control and you limit your distractions, and your work is not going to take you 5 hours, but because you are not controlling your time and you're coming in and out of it, you're not managing it right. Because when you manage your time, you have more of it for yourself. So I'm helping them build these skill sets and these life skills that will hopefully take them. I mean, I'm literally drilling it into them every week in a very loving way, right? That they can take with them. And I want my teens to really own their time so that they can have more of it, because right now, majority of my teens are just strictly students, and they're working around the clock, getting their work done. And it's sad to me. Like, I don't want that for them. Like, that's not fun, right? Like, that's not fun. And I finally, after 6 months of working with one of the girls, she finally is all caught up, and she has her weekends free, and she's like a new teen. Yeah. And I'm like, that's what I want for you. Like, life has to be a balance. You cannot just be all academic. So what will it take? Like, we've got to figure this out, right?
Yeah, it's really
so a lot of life skills, there's a lot, but a lot of life skills and situations. And I pour into the mental health and self-compassion and talk to the strengths. Like, I'm a big encourager, big advocate for that, Katie, and because I know that there's a mental health crisis going on right now that's going to far outweigh COVID, because our teens are in such an anxious frame of mind right now and state because of everything that's going on that will outlive COVID. It will.
Most definitely. So how are they coping with COVID-19?
Oh, you're going to make me cry. It's been really hard for these teens. There's so much negative self-talk. You have teens that when they were in school, they had C, B's, and A's, right? And now you have these students who have been getting D's and F's, and because their lives in the past year and a half have been on screens, and they've been Groundhog Day for like 8 to 4, the same thing, and their brains on these school systems, like the school platforms, and because there's so many layers of it, it's not conducive for the ADHD brain, because there's so many layers of it, and they're doing the work, but they're forgetting to hit submit, and they're not getting credit for it, and they're shutting down, and they're feeling so incredibly bad about themselves, and they're so hard on themselves. And so there's a ton of anxiety. There's probably a ton of negative self-talk that we won't even know about, right? That's all in, to themselves. And so it is a pandemic, even in and of itself.
Yeah.
We need to get our kids back in school, and it's happening. And then you deal with the whole social element. Some of them haven't seen their friends. They haven't been able to. I'm so thankful for Zoom. I'm thankful for FaceTime. I'm thankful for Discord, and the fact that they can, that has kept those relationships alive. But if you have an extroverted child outside of ADHD that hasn't been able to be in a group setting and participating in sports and theater and cheer and all these activities, I mean, it's devastating.
Yeah.
It's just devastating. I mean, they've learned some of the hardest life lessons in the past year. So in some ways, they will be like, bring it on, because I've dealt with all of it. So it's helped them be resolved and resilient when they never even wanted to, right?
Yeah.
But they've had to learn a lot of really, really difficult life lessons that even we didn't have to learn until this year as well. So we were all having to adapt to a shutdown that we've never experienced in my 50 some years, right?
Wow. And one more question, because we mentioned the holistic approach before, and I can imagine that it's very relevant to promote positive mental health, especially in this pandemic. So
Right.
first of all, can you please define what you meant by holistic treatment in ADHD?
Well, for me, I think it's non-meds. Not that I'm opposed to meds. I'm speaking from how I've handled it personally with my son.
Yeah.
It's mindfulness, right? It's having a mindfulness practice, having that balance of practicing breath, having quiet time, having the out of having a place to put the anger, the frustration, right? Whether that's exercise, whether that's a punching bag, whether that's just breathing, literally, because there's some anger at times, right? There's some frustration and you have to own that. Like you can't suppress that. You can't say, oh, you shouldn't be angry about that, or you shouldn't be frustrated. Like that's like saying you shouldn't be breathing. Like those are emotions that are real and you have to own that. So having the ability to give it a place to go, right? Not at me, not at your sibling, not at the dad, like finding the out for it, right? So having a really good practice for that. And obviously it's positive self-talk. We do diet, we do exercise, obviously a ton of support and structure. Routine has always been exceptionally, really, really what works. My parenting style with my son, how I speak with him, positive affirmations. My sons are very positive young men and they're very confident. That did not happen overnight. And so always being exceptionally mindful as a parent of how I speak with them, and what I've chosen to say and not to say, and how to approach a situation, and also how to help them in those times when they're triggered, if I may.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Very inspiring approach, Kelly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's say a parent in our audience is listening and they have a loved one or a child that's been diagnosed with ADHD. How can they support this child?
One of the best things you can do is focus on all the things that are right and good about your child and focus on the strengths. It's so easy to focus on everything that's wrong and nitpick and nag. And as a society, as humans, we just tend to fall to the negative, right? We tend to say, oh, you didn't do that right, or you didn't do it my way, or I told you to do it this way, or why did you forget to do that? Oh my gosh, like, no. Like you are contributing to all the negative messages that your children is hearing and interpreting and internalizing. And that in turn is exasperating the negative self-talk. So even on the days, and trust me, I've had days when it's been really hard to find the positives. I've been there, and I'm making it sound like it's been a cakewalk. It has not. I'm not saying it. It has been a very, very challenging walk with my son. I'm not saying it's easy, but even on those days, I always find many things that are good, and focus on the positives. Those who have ADHD thrive when they hear positives. They thrive with affirmation. They thrive when they know that you recognize something that they've done, even if it's they had a meltdown for 3 minutes less, literally, not kidding, right? Even if it's they came down 5 minutes earlier than what expected, or they got out of bed 2 minutes earlier. Thanks for getting out of bed, but I didn't have to call you again, right? It's something that easy, that simple. You want to acknowledge all the little small victories, not all, you don't want to overpraise, but you want to acknowledge small victories along the way. That will feed them, that will reward them, that gives them that little dopamine fix, because they need to know that you are acknowledging and you're noticing all the things that they are doing and not focusing on every single thing that they're not, that is a challenge for them.
I love it. Thank you. It's very
That's one of my secrets. That's like a holistic approach too. Like that's one of my secrets. I focused on all the things that he was doing right and helped him create the skill sets of the things that were challenging.
Yeah, I love it. And what's your message to our audience, in particular the parents?
That's a good question. My message is that you're not alone. There's a ton of resources out there. And, ADHD is worldwide, right? It's not discriminatory. It happens to all ages, all races, all over there. And I don't want you to feel like you're alone. There's a ton of free resources, and you don't need to be embarrassed by it. There's no shame in it. If you have it, it only takes one parent to advocate for your child. If you have a spouse that is saying, has an attitude about it, that happens a lot. Your child needs one person in their corner. So advocate and be that person for your child. Help them through those challenging times. ADHD is so much more popular today and common than it was 5-10 years ago. And hopefully it should be a common name, a common word. And I think at some point the neurodiverse will become the neurotypical in many a year, because I think it's that common, if I may.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. And how can people reach you?
So if you're on Facebook, I run a group called Parenting ADHD Teens. I am in there live 3 or 4 times a week with 5 or 6 minute quick videos on all kinds of facts, things that are happening in parenting world. I also share blog posts, social media posts, what have you. I'm also on Instagram. My company, obviously my coaching practice is called Loving GrADDitude with the ADD in the middle of it. You can find me there, and you can check on my website, lovinggratitude.com, and email me as well. So all the information's there, but I sort of reside in my Facebook group throughout the week, and it's a very loving, supportive community. And I interact with people there as well. So that's where you can find me.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing this information. It's so enlightening on ADHD, Kelly.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you giving me the space to share.
You're welcome. Have a lovely evening.
You too. Thank you, Katie Ann.
You're welcome. Cheers. Thanks for tuning in on ExpertsConnect. Please head on over to TeachSomebody.com and give us an applause. You may share your comments and ask your questions in the comment section. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, as well as follow us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. You can also follow me on Instagram at KadianDavisOwusu. Have a lovely rest of the week. Bye.